Hi,
Hi,
how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good, good. You're based in Australia, obviously.
I'm here right now. I'm actually based in LA, but I just finished a little stint on the new Godzilla film, which shoots up in Brisbane.
Mm.
And so it was like a perfect opportunity to, after that, like hop down to Sydney and see family and just like hang out. So I'm actually in my parents' house right now.
Well, it's very nice. I like what they have going on in the background.
This is my mom's art room, so it's a lot of like, she turned my brother's room into like an art room.
Of course.
So there's a lot of that going on.
Gotcha. Well, I'm in New York, so
Oh,
big
nice.
time.
Oh, so lovely. What was that? Sorry.
I said just big time difference.
Oh my God, I know. It right now I've got like a friend group chat that we're all trying to do, and everyone's like one's in London, one's in New York, one's in Sydney. It's like a chaos trying to do it. But here we are. We've done it.
We are, and it's so nice to talk to you about apple cider vinegar because your performance was so moving and just heartbreaking. I really, it's weird to say I enjoyed it, but I really thought it was well done.
Oh, thank you. That's so lovely to hear and so kind of you. Thank you.
I was wondering, were you familiar with the story of Belle Gibson and Millie?
Yeah, I was. I mean, it was such a cultural, I think, like touch point here in Australia. It was in that time of the rise of social media and the rise of that wellness influencer. And she really was, I mean, she was such an impressive person in that industry, despite like all the horrible things that she was claiming. But at the time, like she really was quite a trailblazer. And so we used to say how on the set how interesting it was that if she hadn't maybe gone along with a lot of the cancer stuff, the fact that she was able to create this amazing cookbook and like launch an app on the Apple Watch and be so young and successful, like she would have been a very impressive, successful person, but she just clearly also had an entire part of her personality doing a whole lot of things. So it was very in the media here, and I remember the moment. I was overseas at the time, but I remember when the 60-minute interview aired, and it was the pink sweater with the glossy lips and the pear. And I remember like when we were filming it, like going back and looking at it again, and just how extraordinary it was, because it's still like she cannot lie. She cannot tell the truth. It's extraordinary. But then I guess like Miller being a little bit of an amalgamation of a lot of the wellness influences, and that was like such a influential time for me. I was like 16 or 17, and I remember like that those early days of the wellness influencer, and it was so strangely imbued with the the beauty standards for women that were suddenly projected to young women, and at that time of social media where we hadn't quite gotten to the what we now know is quite a polished and airbrushed version of the social media influencer, but it was still without guardrails. And so I feel like it was a lot of these young women who were also like finding community, but also suddenly having a whole lot more influence and power. And I mean, I remember that like be early on, like definitely like absorbing a lot of that. And I think it was like I was really interested in joining this show also to kind of show that world, but also the way that we'd sort of broken down a lot of those barriers without any guardrails.
Yeah, I mean, when I was watching it, I saw like the early logos of social media. I was like, wow, like I remember that. I remember when Hipstamatic got bought by Instagram.
It's thematic.
Whole thing. It was a whole thing.
Yeah.
And then I was in college at the time and we were watching like documentaries on what social media will do to children. And here we
Yeah.
are. So many problems with self-image. And everyone is
Oh my
like
God.
are on their face. It's insane.
It's insane. And I remember a lot of like there was so many raw food accounts at that time, and it was sort of like raw food will heal you, but also it was this approach to health and wellness, but it also had this really sinister dark side of like young women, I think, having to feel a certain way about their bodies and their image. And so it's like I think Sam Strauss also did like quite a good job of like there is a thread of that in there, but obviously, with Miller, there's then a whole other side of taking health and wellness into your own hands. And it was so interesting filming this because it did give me a lot more, I think, compassion for people going through that because of how messy it is. And, if we had a cure for cancer, well, we would have a cure for cancer, and I guess people wouldn't be searching for all these other options. And I think at the heart of it, there's just so much hope and desperation, and also need to be taking into account not just like here are my symptoms, but also like this is the world that I'm operating in. This is like the person, the stresses, the anxieties, the other causes of what is making my disease or illness or life the way it is. And so it was it was like this explosion of information, but absolutely no, then we were like putting a lot more power on people who didn't have the same, you know, degrees or understanding.
When I was watching the show, I was so empathetic towards Millie because she really didn't want to be the face of a disease. She wanted to take, she wanted to have power in her own hands of how she can heal by herself. Um, and there was a certain level of denial of how sick she was. But she was also the type of influencer that was speaking at conferences and really cared about people. I just thought that was such like a tragic end.
Yeah, it's so tragic. And I think you said it so well. I mean, she was both those things. She was really in denial, and I think there was such a I think for me, we really the through line for her was this idea that she'd failed herself and she'd failed her own body in the way that she consumed this kind of, I guess, very modern way of living, whether it's junk food or like being young and partying or this idea of that she's caused this to herself. And I do think you kind of maybe see this in like still in the world now. There's a lot of young people who kind of think like, well, have I'm a product of the environment that I'm living in. And is that the thing that's also giving me this illness? But and for her to never feel like this failure, but I think at the very heart of it, like she does like want people to feel hopeful and optimistic, and that there is an autonomy, I suppose, in vying for your own interests and an autonomy for your own body. And and you still see that in medicine now, especially women. Women do find that there is like less of a understanding on their health and wellness in so many ways. But I do, so it's just so messy, I think. But of course, for her being a young woman too, like the idea of so much of your identity being, I suppose, shackled in the idea of like being pretty and young, and if then that was to be taken away from you, that there are real life changes for that, and that it is not so simple as like a sterile, we're going to cut off your limb. It's so much more. I mean, I just think it captured the messiness of it so well in the way that we're then kind of framing our lives through social media now and what that looks like.
It really captured the messiness of it all, and the show really unpacked these. I thought it was very interesting because these influencers are very different from one another, and they're women on two different trajectories. You have one woman who's faking an illness and for likes, basically, and obviously
Yeah.
she's ill. And then you have this other woman who really is reaching out and trying to educate herself and a whole audience and just trying to also be normal. I thought the show really did a great job of that.
Yeah, and for Mila as well, like she's like if you've got Belle lying to the world, you sort of have Mila lying to herself,
Yeah.
you know, and not being able to confront the reality. And what's so tragic as well, like that kind of illness, osteosarcoma, is it has like a very high success rate if it's treated early. And so it's just it's I do think there is something to be said about how I think this show really filming it did I think it I'd always sort of thought of it as being like it's one or the other. It's sort of modern medicine or conventional medicine or maybe holistic medicine, and they don't really cross. But so much of this had sort of I guess it had shown me that there are parts of it, and just having a lot of friends or, loved ones, and we all have them that have gone through something like this, and knowing that there are things that conventional or modern medicine can't necessarily solve, and and that the internet has been able to show us this wealth of new information. But I would say, like, a lot of people are asking, like, do you think it's as prevalent now? And I was like, I do. I think it's just as prevalent, if even more right now, like you're having a whole like the Maha debate with like RFK Jr., right? Like this interesting way that it is right now, even worming its way through society with it. It's like, is it actually raw milk? And like, do we try like there is such a distrust in the way that I think people are experiencing medicine as a whole. And I don't know what that is, if that's this sort of like this overwhelming amount of information, or this like this kind of this it's but it seems like this was one of those very early inception points,
Right.
and watching it kind of through the eyes of like a young woman is so fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I have moments in my life where I'm like, do we have too much information? Do we know too much?
Right.
No, like women's health care has holes in it. Like no one is really, yeah, we have to do our own research.
Absolutely. Like I mean, the fact that I feel like so many of my friends now have finally been diagnosed with like endometriosis or like PCOS, and like that just always being like, I don't know, I guess you were like just a hypochondriac. And it's like, no, these women had like serious health problems, and it's just always been disregarded. And like that's the thing, like that's been there for a really long time, and it's crazy that in like the last couple of years that's only really been validated, kind of. And even still there's not even really like a treatment. It's sort of like, well, we can go in and maybe take some samples, and like I guess then we can confirm that you have it. Like it's there are a lot of holes in medicine, and I did have some people in my life that had been going through a lot of um, like their own personal health journeys and with illnesses, and to see that they're like not only has is modern medicine like getting so much more advanced, but that there are the holes, and there's a lot of hope trying to search for different things that might work for you that don't work for other people. And it's so, yeah. I don't know if it's like is it the messaging around the way we like experience medicine, health and wellness? It's hard. It's really hard.
And for you, you're representing a character who was, well, you're representing a character who is like an amalgamation of influencers, but also Jessica Ainscough, who was like a wellness warrior, and admired in the wellness community in real life. I'm wondering like what level of responsibility did you feel to represent her or someone like her as authentically as you can?
I guess there's this. Like, she definitely was an amalgamation because we also wanted to, have that character be able to go toe to toe with Belle, and that in being able to like really bump her up. And um but I do think, like, again, there were so many influences at that time that I was aware of, and I think there wasn't, in the way that there was a maliciousness to Belle, there wasn't necessarily the same maliciousness with these women. I do think there were a lot of very deeply entrenched and um, personal insecurities that were coming through. And and so I think for me there was this sort of there was a responsibility to allow her to not necessarily be likable, but to be able to understand why someone like her would make those choices. And it makes me, like happy to hear from you that like even though you're watching this character make these, heartbreaking or terrible or bad decisions, that you still sort of feel for them and you still understand kind of why, because there is this desperation and there's this yearning to try and fix it, even though it is maybe misguided. And so I think, you know, like Miller really believes in all of this. It's not something that she's also like, I'm pretending that she gets her mother onto it. And like, this is something that these real life influencers had done. And so there was like this deeply entrenched belief and hope. And I think so for me, it was like trying to do that as a service of, these weren't character, these were smart, this is still smart character that's like, that is making these decisions based off things that are important to her. And it's not, but like, that they're not necessarily then right. But I think for me, it was trying to make sure that like that truth is really at the center of it, that hope, that like need to rewrite these wrongs, I guess. That it's so funny because like also so many people I talk to as well, like I would run into people and they were like, yeah, that was like my dad, like got really sick and then would only drink tea from Peru. And so it's just like it's not that uncommon. And so I think it was really trying to understand the mentality of these young women who are battling, I guess, what their image in society looked like. And that sounds so vain and so surface level, but I think realizing that how unbelievably dominating that is for like young women, but also this this need and desire to like try and have control of their own body and their own choices, however misguided that may be.
And these two characters, as we've been talking about, are so different. And I know you had limited scenes with Caitlyn Dver, but I really enjoyed um, when your character was a part of her character's psychosis and was like egging her on as she's
Mhm.
stealing words and lines from your character's story. So I was wondering, how was it to share the screen with her?
Oh my God, it was the best. It was the best. I mean, Caitlyn's such an extraordinary actress, but um, she's also just a great friend of mine now. Um, and so it was really lovely, but it was also, I guess, fascinating to see how we do all now absorb this kind of language of the online zeitgeist. Like it is this sort of performative world that we subscribe to. And like we've all kind of changed our vernacular because of it. There are things that we say now that we didn't say before, where it's like talking to your own personal audience. Um, it was like fascinating to see that kind of crossover, but also, yeah, the way that those two characters are egging each other on and just seeing how the rapid rise of and competitiveness and false, idea of what our lives look like being challenged with these two characters. It was great to work with her. It was a shame that it was only a few limited scenes too. So hopefully we'll get more in the future.
Well, I feel like you will, considering Monsterverse
Yes.
is a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. We have since. It's been really great.
But yeah, with this project, you go into some really dark places. I'm as an actress. I mean, I just think of the scene where she's confronting her father about her illness, how bad and how accelerated it has gotten, and she's like unwrapping the bandages, and you see her ravaged arm. It's intense. How was filming that?
It was awful. I will say this character more than I think maybe the most, honestly, out of any, like, affected me on quite like a personal, visceral level. It wasn't something that I was really able to shake for a while. And I don't know if that's because, not only was it something that like that it was like that mindset is so like even initially, even it's so desperate and so angry with herself and angry at the situation and then this sort of d- just like free fall of how wrong she was and having to just feel like she's absorbing whatever kind of responsibility on her own body but others and her family and this self-imposed yeah like I don't know what the word is, but it was hard. It was something that it didn't quite. Usually I'll like get home and I'm like I'll just like shower off the day. And this one it really lingered and that scene in particular. I mean, every time I would read it, I would just start crying because it's so heartbreaking. I mean that like her dad just having already lost his wife and then now facing the inevitability of losing his daughter after trying to desperately to fix everything. I mean, it it's just heartbreaking. Um, it was hard.
And
Yeah.
lastly, for you, what do you hope people take away from this series? Because there's so many things to unpack here. There's so many topics at hand.
Yeah. I mean, for me, what I took away really was this. I mean, two things, obviously. One that I already knew, and I think it just further solidified it, is that obviously you cannot trust everything on the internet. You like influencers are not the professionals for medical advice. They're not. Or for any kind of important world topics, whether it be like politics or medicine, their influences are not the like don't read everything you see online, obviously. But that was something that was not, so new to me growing up in the social media world. But the other being, I think more personally that it's left me with just, I guess, a lot more compassion for people going through something like this. Not because what I think some people are doing right. It's more just that it is so messy. And this is a person, these things they not only affect the individual, but they affect everyone else around them. It affects their families, it affects their friends, it affects the community that they're a part of. And so I think there's such a messiness to it. And the idea of having to confront your mortality as like a young person it's like I can't imagine like it's so extraordinarily confronting and so I just think there was a little bit more grace and understanding I left with to try and yeah really empathize with like someone having to go through that and navigating the world of medicine and the holes in it and the way that modern medicine can be so sterile and uncompassionate and so there it left me with a little bit more grace for everyone just trying to find answers and and have autonomy over their bodies and themselves.
That's a beautiful note to end on. And I have to say, this was a pleasure to speak with you about this. I've been doing this for about 12 years now, and I can count on maybe one hand how many times I get to speak to women about women's issues, especially with.
Wow.
So thank you so much.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. It was really lovely to talk to you too.